The other day I had lunch with an old friend, someone I have not kept in touch with for the last couple of years. And so it was something of a reunion. We went to a local restaurant, ordered lunch, and began the catching up. My companion ordered pasta. And when it was delivered, she tasted it and then called the waitress over and said, "Could I get some Parmesan cheese on the side?" The waitress brought the cheese. My friend sprinkled it liberally on her pasta, then tasted it. And I said, "How is it?" And she said, "It's still a little bland." And I said, "You know, that's the trouble with sawdust." And she looked at me sort of strangely, and I said, "You do know that Parmesan cheese is sawdust?" And she said, "No, she did not." The FDA allows up to 4% of cellulose, which is made from wood shavings, which is sawdust. Up to 4% of cellulose in Parmesan cheese. In a recent study, it is actually closer to 10% most of the time. Wood dust in your cheese. As I read the article about it, what I discovered is that if you are a fanatic about Parmesan cheese, you need to know that it isn't really made from Parmesan. That it's made from much cheaper cheeses, shaved, a little sawdust thrown in, and that's what you pay for in the store. A few years ago, I was on a trip to Greece and became enamored of the Greek olive oil. I said something to the guide about how wonderful the olive oil was. And then he gave me a lesson about olive oil. That in Greece, it's usually the first run that you get, even at cheaper restaurants. What you buy in the store here is usually 3-4% bad olives and other things mixed in with it. Recently, one of my barbecue sites sent me an ad to join the Olive Oil Club. Olive oil made from first harvest olives straight from Greece. That if you join this club, that twice a year they will send you to, I think it was 16 ounces, 14 or 16 ounce bottles of really good olive oil. 2 little bottles, $380. So it's back to Publix. In our gospel lesson for this morning, Jesus addresses the issue of food contamination. The setting is a carryover from last week's gospel. We're in that portion of Matthew where Jesus is at the outset of his ministry. He's been baptized, commissioned his helpers, taken up residence in Bethsaida, a town on the largest lake in Israel. It's a fishing community. He's become very well known both by his preaching and his healing. People flock to him. They want to hear what he has to say. They're hoping to witness a miracle. So it is that as he walks along the shoreline, the crowds flock around him. So much so that he gets into a boat and sits in the bow so that he can address those people. And he begins telling them parables. parables about everyday life, parables about things that people would know all about. Last week we heard about the crazy sower, the farmer who goes out and sows seed, indiscriminately throwing seed everywhere. Some of it fell on rocky ground, some fell on very little soil, some of it actually fell on some good soil. And he says when it sprouted up, weeds would choke it out, the sun would bake it, but lo and behold, the seed on the good soil flourished. But he doesn't interpret it. He tells these stories about everyday life and says, think about it. Think about it. In the gospel lesson this morning, he is still on that shoreline, still sitting in that boat, and the people have said, tell us more, tell us more. And so he tells them another story. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed, but under the cover of darkness an enemy came and sowed weeds on top of the good seed. The original text identifies the bad seed as darnel. Darnel looks exactly like wheat until the end stage of growth. It will become shorter than wheat, and the only time that you can tell the difference between the two is at harvest time. The darnel will be shorter and can be separated, but up until that point you cannot tell the difference. The laborers of this farmer identified that something's wrong. There are weeds growing up where there should be good wheat. They go to him and say to him, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to pull up the weeds? And he points out to them that they look just like the wheat. If you start pulling up, you're going to pull up the good stuff. Wait until the harvest. And then you can separate them. He doesn't explain the story. But if you understand some of the background, it begins to make sense. These are poor people. The land is poor. Good seed is scarce. The staple food is bread. Bread. They're not growing beautiful vegetable gardens. They're not herding sheep. They can't afford any of that. They're lucky to grow some wheat. And every morning the women make bread. And sometimes that's all they have to eat all day long. Jesus compares that to the kingdom of heaven. What he's saying is, the world we live in has both good and evil in it. If you set out to identify who is who, or separate them, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And you're going to occupy yourself with something that you will not solve. Wait until the harvest. Wait until God's kingdom arrives and all will be well. He doesn't explain it. He does tell his disciples that in a private session with them. A little more elaboration. But But he says the kingdom of heaven is not, it is now. It comes among us, and it is not about separating the good from the bad. It is about how you live your life now. That's the important thing. Will you be among the weeds, or will you eventually be among the wheat? That's our society today, in many ways, resembles that society. The way Jesus' society dealt with it mostly was in one of two ways. Folks like the Essenes, they took to the desert, formed their own little community, and had nothing to do with anybody else. The others, like the Pharisees, set out to change people, to identify the evil ones and cast them out, saying our standards are the right standards, live by our standards and you're fine. Jesus says to his disciples, neither one of those ways is the way to live. If you are faithful to the one who has created you, if you are faithful to the one who cares about you, if you are faithful to the one who loves you, that's the one who will in some way at some time make it right. That's the job of the Creator, to separate the good from the bad. When I read through this lesson for today, what dawned on me is that our society isn't really a lot different in many ways. We have those who, among us, who want to root out anybody who is different, anybody who disagrees, to root out anyone who is not like them. There are others who will say, to hell with it. I hear that a lot. Write off all of them. And neither way is very productive. The kingdom has to do with being faithful to the one who is faithful to you, the one who cares for you and loves for you. The gospel is about a relationship. That the one who has created you, the one who calls you by name, given at your baptism, that's the one that you need to be loyal to. To bask in that caring and let it work its miracle within you. Let the separation, the condemnation, left up to the one who's in charge. Seems to me that's the message. That what we are called to is what we are doing. What we're doing. To be a community that is transformative, a community that is caring, a community that is welcoming. That if we do that, we will take care of the weeds themselves. I was reading a story not long ago. It's from a book called My Father's Blessing, Stories of Strength, Refuge, and Belonging. It's written by a woman whose grandfather, whom she loved a great deal, was an Orthodox rabbi and a rabbinic scholar. woman, Naomi Reman, loved her grandfather very much. She tells in the book, she tells a story about something that happened when she was very young. She was 4 and very fond of her grandfather. And one day her grandfather brought her a paper cup. She expected to find something exceptional in it, but when she looked, it was full of dirt. And she was disappointed. She said to her grandfather, "I'm not allowed to play in dirt." And he reached down and took up from her doll set a little teapot. He said, come with me." They went in the kitchen and he filled the teapot with water and then led her to her room and put the cup on the windowsill and put the teapot of water on the nightstand. And he said, "Promise me that every day you will put a little of this water on that dirt." And he said, "You know, something special just might happen. Every day." She loved her grandfather a great deal. And so this 4-year-old little girl undertook to please her grandfather, something that she really didn't care that much about. Every day for the first few days, she put a few drops of water on the dirt, looked at it, nothing. At the end of a week, she said to her grandfather, "Nothing's happened, so we don't need to do this anymore, do we?" He said, "Naomi, you promised every day." Into the second week, she found on 2 nights that she fell asleep. Woke up and remembered her promise and got out of bed and put some water on the dirt. At the end of the second week, she got with her grandfather and said, "I'm tired of this. It's not any fun." And he said to her very lovingly, "Naomi, you promised every day." So she kept at it. On the morning of the 3rd week, 2 little leaves appeared in the dirt. And she was amazed. So amazed that she couldn't wait for her grandfather to come over and she could show him and tell him. And he smiled and he said, "Yes, you faithfully watered it. And look at this miracle that's happened." And she was going to tell all of her friends about it. And she said, "There's life in there. It comes out." And he said, "And all it needs is water?" And he hugged her and he said, "No, it needs faithfulness." Faithfulness. To quote the gospel, "Let those with ears hear."